1. The House of Burning Magnolia. The air around the plantation dripped with the scent of flowers that never bloomed without blood. Servants whispered that the magnolias grew from roots sunk in graves, and that anyone who slept beneath their shade dreamed of chains. It began with the smell. Thick, sweet, and wrong. Even in winter, when frost rimed the fields and the river mist clung low, that perfume still floated through the air like a ghost that refused to die. The house at the heart of it all, the Levingston plantation, rose above the land like a cathedral built for sin. Its white columns glowed pale under moonlight, and from afar it looked peaceful, noble even. But anyone who came close enough could hear it breathing. Locals called it the House of Burning Magnolia. They said the magnolia trees on its grounds bloomed longer than any others, their petals ivory and wide as a woman's hand. But when you pressed your nose to them, the fragrance turned metallic, like rust or blood left too long in the sun. Travelers who camped nearby often awoke before dawn, trembling from dreams they couldn't explain. Dreams of a woman singing from beneath the roots. Dreams of chains that rattled like wind chimes. The house had stood for generations, its walls swallowing the names of those who built it. Each owner left behind more whispers than heirs. Some vanished into the swamp. Some died in their sleep with magnolia petals in their mouths. Yet no matter how many graves filled the backfield, the house endured. The newest master, Charles Levingston, had inherited it from his father, along with the debts and the ghosts. He was a man of sharp suits and sharper temper, known for the cruelty of his order and the pride of his bloodline. But beneath his sternness lay a fear he never spoke aloud, the fear that the house was listening. On nights when he paced the gallery with brandy in hand, he could feel it. The air would tighten, heavy with the magnolia scent until it seemed to press against his skin. The wallpaper, patterned with twisting vines, appeared to move when he looked too long. The chandeliers swayed when there was no wind. Servants crossed themselves when his back was turned. Once a stable boy fled in the middle of the night. He ran all the way to Savannah barefoot, babbling about voices calling him by name. "They come from the trees," he gasped, "from the roots." When they found him days later, he was clutching a handful of magnolia petals that would not decay, even in the rain. Yet for all its omens, the house remained alive with labor and ceremony. Guests came for supper, music filled the halls, and the master's word ruled. Beneath the grandeur, however, the enslaved carried stories too dangerous to tell in daylight. They said that the magnolia trees had once been planted over the graves of a dozen souls, workers who died during the house's construction. To keep their spirits quiet, the first mistress of the estate had poured oil and ash into the roots. But some spirits, the old women warned, did not rest. They grew. In the far corner of the property, where the trees grew thickest, stood one tree larger than the rest. Its bark was darker, almost black, and its blossoms came early, long before spring. No one was allowed near it. They said that if you stood under its branches too long, you would hear breathing from beneath the soil. One evening, as twilight bled into the fields, the sky bruised violet and red. A storm was coming, and the scent of magnolia was stronger than ever, so strong that even Charles paused at the window. The wind carried a low hum like a song without words. For a moment he thought he saw movement by the largest tree, a figure, slight and still, staring back toward the house. He called for his foreman, but when they reached the grove, there was no one there. Only a single blossom lay on the path, its petals wet with something thicker than rain. From that night on, the house began to change. The walls seemed to absorb every sound. The servants moved in silence, glancing toward shadows as if expecting them to speak. And in the deep of night, a new rhythm joined the chorus of crickets and frogs, a faint, deliberate tapping, echoing from somewhere under the floorboards. Charles told himself it was nonsense, superstition, wood settling. But sometimes, when sleep eluded him, he heard a whisper rise between the walls. The roots remember. When morning came, he would find magnolia petals scattered across his desk, though none had been brought inside. The overseer refused to walk the grounds after dark. He claimed the magnolia grove pulsed with light, faint and green, as if the trees themselves breathed. The slaves spoke in hushed voices of a curse, of the house drinking from the same well of pain it had created. On the third night of the storm, thunder cracked so close it shook the mirrors loose. Charles stood at the top of the grand staircase, staring at the double doors below. The scent was unbearable now, cloying and thick. Then came the sound again. 3 slow knocks, not from the door but from beneath the floor, as though someone were knocking to be let out. He turned to call for help, but the hall behind him had gone dark. Only the magnolia blossoms in the vases along the wall glowed faintly, their petals trembling. A voice rose from the blackness, soft as breath against his ear. Every root has its reckoning. The candles blew out. 2. The woman with eyes like storms. She arrived in silence, her gaze holding thunder that had yet to strike. Even the cruelest overseer forgot his breath when her shadow crossed the yard. No one knew her name at first. She came walking through the mist one dawn, when the world was still silver and wet with dew. The crows fell quiet as she passed beneath the magnolias, and even the wind seemed to draw back from her. Her dress was travel-worn, dark with dust and river water, and yet she moved like a woman untouched by the world. Some said she had come from the bayou, others swore she'd risen straight from the earth beneath the trees. All anyone agreed upon was her eyes, grey, sharp as lightning against a black sky. Eyes that seemed to see not only the living, but the ghosts clinging to their shoulders. When the housekeeper brought her before Master Charles, the magnolia scent deepened in the air, thick as perfume before a funeral. Charles looked up from his desk, words dying on his tongue. For a moment it felt as though the room itself leaned toward her. "What is your name?" he asked. Her voice was low, measured. "They called me Eden." The name hung there delicate and dangerous. Charles studied her, searching for some trace of insolence, but found none. And yet, when she met his eyes, he felt a shiver, not of fear but recognition, as though he'd seen her somewhere before, in a dream or a memory he'd tried to forget. The air trembled. A window latch clicked open on its own. "You'll take service in the house," he said quickly, and signed her name into the ledger, as if it might tether her to the world. From that moment, nothing in the Levingston plantation was the same. Eden moved through the halls like a shadow the house had been waiting for. The servants watched her from doorways, whispering prayers beneath their breath. When she passed, candles flared brighter. Mirrors fogged without touch. The old cook swore that every night she slept under the magnolia tree, and that the flowers bent their branches to cover her. Charles found himself listening for her footsteps, even when he didn't mean to. He told himself it was suspicion, but deep down he knew it was something else. In her presence, the constant tension that had haunted the house, that low hum of dread in the walls, seemed to quiet. And yet, beneath that calm, another current stirred, darker and older. One evening, as the sun bled through the Spanish moss, Charles came upon her standing by the great mirror in the hall. She was tracing a hand across its surface, not her reflection but something behind it, a shadow that didn't move when she did. "Why do you do that?" he asked softly. She didn't turn. Sometimes the mirror remembers what the eyes forget. Her words unsettled him more than her calm. When she finally met his gaze in the glass, he saw just for an instant that her eyes were not grey at all, but storm-black and swirling, alive, endless. That night, thunder rolled across the horizon, though no storm came. The magnolia petals began to fall one by one, covering the lawn like pale snow. The servants whispered that Eden spoke to the house when no one was listening, that she walked barefoot through the grove, humming songs older than the land itself. The overseer claimed he saw her kneeling beside the largest magnolia, her hands pressed to the soil as if feeling a heartbeat. Charles could not stay away. Each day he found some reason to pass her in the hall, to speak, if only briefly. He told himself he needed to understand her origins, her purpose. But the truth was simpler and more damning. He was drawn to her. Not by beauty alone, but by the sense that she knew him, that she saw the rot beneath his civility. "You're not from here," he said one evening as they stood on the veranda, watching the fields darken. She smiled faintly, her voice a whisper. "No one truly is. Then where? Where the roots drink deeper than blood." He didn't understand her meaning, not then. But as she walked away, lightning flickered on the horizon, and he swore the scent of magnolia followed her like a veil. That night he dreamed again, the same dream that had haunted him since childhood. The house was burning, magnolia blossoms falling through smoke. A woman stood in the flames, her eyes grey and endless, holding out her hand. "Come back to me," she whispered, and he woke with ash on his palms. By dawn, Eden was gone from her quarters. They searched the grounds, the stables, even the riverbank, but found only footprints leading into the grove. Charles followed them himself, though every step felt heavier than the last. The magnolia trees loomed overhead, their blossoms glistening with dew that smelled faintly of iron. He called her name once, twice. And then he heard it, a voice behind him, soft, familiar. "Do you know what your house is built upon?" He turned. She stood beneath the largest magnolia, hands outstretched to the roots that curled from the soil like veins. Her face was calm, but her eyes were alive with stormlight. "The roots remember," she said, the same words he'd heard whispered in the walls. A wind rose, shaking the branches. The air filled with petals, thousands of them, swirling like pale ghosts around her. And for an instant, he saw shapes within them, faces, faint and sorrowful, reaching upward from beneath the earth. Charles stumbled back. The ground shuddered beneath his boots. Eden's voice came again, low and distant now, almost swallowed by the rising wind. "Not all who serve are bound. Not all who own are free." Lightning tore across the sky, striking somewhere beyond the grove. The shock threw him to the ground. When the light faded, she was gone. Only the scent remained, magnolia and storm. He rose, trembling, and found a single blossom caught in his coat. Its petals were blackened around the edges, as though burned. Behind him the house moaned, a long, low sound, like wood bending under weight. He turned toward it, and for the first time realized that the shutters were all open. Every window was watching. End of chapter 2. The last image, Charles standing beneath the trees, petals spiraling around him like ashes. From the darkness of the house a whisper escapes, low, knowing, almost tender. "She has come home." 3. Lessons Beneath the Red Moon by Candlelight. She read from pages hidden for generations, words that twisted like vines around the soul. The master's voice faltered as he repeated them, unaware the syllables were already binding him. The moon that night hung low and swollen, the color of old blood. It painted the fields in rust and copper, turning the magnolia blossoms into pale, ghostly eyes that watched from the trees. The house itself seemed to hold its breath, as though waiting for something it could not name. Charles Levingston sat alone in his study, the shutters drawn, the candles guttering in pools of wax. For 3 nights he had not slept, not since the woman called Eden had vanished into the grove and returned. Silent, unmarked and changed. She moved through the house now with a strange calm, her steps soundless on the wood, her eyes catching the light like storm clouds catching lightning. The servants crossed themselves when she passed, whispering that she had gone into the roots and come back touched by something that did not belong to this world. Charles tried to dismiss their fears, but each night the house grew stranger. The clock stopped without reason. The mirrors clouded with breath that was not his own. In the farthest corners of the halls, the wallpaper seemed to ripple as though something beneath it were breathing, and through it all the scent of magnolia, that sweet, cloying perfume, deepened until it tasted like copper on the tongue. When she appeared at his door that night, candle in hand, her face lit from below by the trembling flame, he did not question why. He only asked, hoarse and unsteady, "What do you want of me?" She looked at him for a long time before answering. "To remember." "Remember what?" Eden stepped closer, and he saw that she carried a small leather-bound book, its cover cracked and darkened with age. "The words your house was built upon," she said. Charles stared at it, his heart quickening. "Where did you find that?" "In the walls," she said. "Behind the hearth where the first master sealed his sins." Her voice was steady, but her hands trembled slightly as she placed the book before him. The candlelight licked across its cover, revealing faint markings burned into the leather. A sigil, circular and jagged, half obliterated by time. "It's written in the old tongue," she murmured. "The tongue of roots and rain and the dead that were never named." Charles hesitated. The air thickened around them, heavy as storm air before the strike. He should have sent her away, should have cast the book into the fire. But curiosity, that cruel and ancient vice which rose within him like hunger, read it, he said. Eden's eyes lifted to his, uncertain. "These words were not meant for the living. Then perhaps they'll remind the dead to keep their peace." A silence followed, the kind that seems to bend the air. Then she opened the book. The pages were thin as moth wings, the ink the color of dried blood. As she read, her voice grew low and rhythmic, each word curling into the next like smoke. The language was old, full of sounds that did not belong to the human throat. The candle flame shuddered and flared. Shadows gathered in the corners of the room like creatures crouching closer. Charles felt each syllable sink into him, heavy, resonant, thrumming through his bones. He tried to follow her words, to repeat them, but his tongue stumbled. The sounds did not fit the shape of his mouth. Still he persisted, caught between awe and dread. As he spoke, the air seemed to move differently. The floorboards beneath their feet creaked, though neither of them stepped. The magnolia branches outside scratched softly against the window glass, though there was no wind. Eden's gaze never left the page. "You must not finish it," she whispered, but Charles did not hear. The rhythm had taken him. Each word felt like a note in a song he'd always known, a song his blood remembered. His voice rose and cracked, echoing through the hall. Then, without warning, the candles went out. Darkness swallowed them whole. Only the red moonlight remained, seeping through the shutters like veins of fire. In that dim, living glow, he saw the ink on the open page begin to move, the letters writhing like worms, rearranging themselves into new shapes. The scent of magnolia filled the room, so thick it smothered breath. Eden's voice trembled. "You've woken it. What have I done?" he gasped. She shut the book with a snap that sounded like bone. The house remembers the words of its birth. From somewhere deep within the walls came a sound, low, dragging like something vast, stirring in its sleep. The portraits trembled on their hooks. Dust drifted from the ceiling in soft spirals. Charles stumbled back, heart hammering. "What's happening?" Eden's eyes glowed faintly in the dim. "You called the name that was buried, the name that fed the roots." The sound grew louder now, a pulsing throb that seemed to come from beneath the floor. A faint light began to seep through the cracks in the boards, red and gold like molten earth. He turned to flee, but the door refused to open. The handle burned his hand, searing his skin. Behind him, the book opened again, though neither of them touched it. The pages fluttered wildly, stopping on a single line. Eden read it aloud, her voice breaking, "All who command must one day kneel." The words echoed once, twice, then vanished into silence, and then the whisper. It came from every corner of the house, soft at first, then growing, multiplying, until the room trembled with it. "Kneel, kneel, kneel." The red light flared, bright as a forge. Charles fell to his knees. When the glow finally dimmed, Eden stood alone. The master's eyes were open but empty, his breath shallow. In his palm lay a single magnolia petal, blackened, like the one before, and beneath it a faint mark carved into his skin, shaped like the sigil on the book's cover. She closed his hand gently. Outside, the red moon slipped behind the trees, and the house exhaled a long, shuddering sigh. Eden looked up toward the ceiling as dust drifted like ash. "It has begun," she whispered, and from far below, deep beneath the magnolia roots, something whispered back. He began to hear her singing in empty corridors, soft as a prayer, cold as water over stone. Each note was a thread, tightening around his heart. The fever came 3 nights after the red moon. At first it was only a heat behind his eyes, a tremor in his hands. Charles Livingston blamed exhaustion, blamed the storm that had never quite passed. But as the days bled into one another, the sickness deepened, not of body, but of soul. His dreams lengthened until they no longer ended when he woke. By day, the house glowed faintly with its own light. The walls seemed to breathe, the air thick and damp as if the magnolia roots below had begun to drink from the rooms themselves. Servants whispered that the master was changing, that his reflection no longer followed his movements, that his shadow lingered even after he left a room. He dismissed them all until the singing began. At first he thought it was memory, a melody he had once known as a child, lilting and strange, drifting like smoke through half-forgotten dreams. But the notes grew clearer with every passing night. They came from the halls when all the candles were out, weaving between the walls like wind. Sometimes it was behind him, sometimes it came from above, and sometimes, worst of all, it came from within the floorboards, beneath his bed, as if the roots themselves were humming. He rose one midnight, drenched in sweat, the fever pulsing behind his eyes like a living thing. The house was silent save for that sound, the voice, distant yet near, calling him by a name he did not remember owning. "Eden?" he whispered into the dark. No answer, only the creak of the old staircase and the faint scent of magnolia, thick and sweet as decay. He followed the sound down the hall, barefoot on cold wood. The portraits on the wall seemed to tilt toward him as he passed, their painted eyes gleaming faintly in the candlelight. The song guided him, wordless, sorrowful, unending, until it led him to the drawing room, the one his father had forbidden him to enter after sunset. The door was ajar. He pushed it open. Moonlight spilled through the tall windows, white and thin, like the bones of something long dead. And there, in the center of the room, stood Eden. Her back was to him. Her hair fell in a dark cascade down her shoulders, and her hands rested lightly on the piano keys, though she was not playing. The sound, that haunting, living song, came from nowhere and everywhere at once. He stepped closer. "Why are you here?" She did not move. "Speak to me," he said again, more desperate now. "Tell me what you've done." At last, she turned. Her eyes caught the moonlight, and for a heartbeat, he saw lightning in them. "It isn't me," she said softly. "It's the house." He opened his mouth to answer, but a sudden wave of heat struck him, fierce, burning through his chest. He staggered, clutching at his throat. The scent of magnolia filled his lungs until he could not breathe. Eden crossed the floor, her movements soundless. "You shouldn't have read the words," she whispered. "The house remembers through you now." What does that mean?" She reached out and touched his cheek. Her hand was cool, like rainwater, and the fever beneath his skin recoiled. But even as her fingers brushed him, a vision unfurled behind his eyes. The magnolia grove alive with fire, roots writhing like serpents, faces screaming from the bark. He gasped and fell to his knees. When he looked up, she was gone. Only the piano remained, the keys shifting on their own, pressing out the ghost of a song that had no end. The fever worsened after that. He could not eat, could not sleep. He walked the halls with eyes that no longer saw clearly, haunted by flashes of memory that were not his own. Men chained beneath the roots, blood spilling into the soil, the magnolias blooming brighter with every drop. The servants began to avoid him. They said he spoke in two voices now, one his own, one deep and hollow, echoing from the walls. They said he stood for hours before the great mirror, whispering to his reflection, smiling as though it whispered back. On the seventh night, thunder broke over the fields, though no rain fell. The air shimmered with heat, and from the grove came the faint hum of the magnolias, petals trembling in the windless dark. Charles awoke to find his bed soaked through with sweat. And something else. The sheets were damp with red, though no wound marked his flesh. The walls seemed to pulse, and from beneath the floor the singing rose again, louder, closer, wrapping around him like a chain. He stumbled toward the door, but it slammed shut before he reached it. The windows rattled. The candle on the nightstand flared high, then went black, and in that darkness he heard her voice again, Eden's voice, soft, sorrowful, inevitable. "It's not the fever, Charles," she whispered. "It's the remembering." He turned toward the sound, and in the dim he saw her standing at the end of the bed. Her dress fluttered, though there was no wind, and her eyes glowed faintly with the same red as the buried moon. "What am I remembering?" he asked, though his throat was raw and trembling. Her answer was barely a breath, "What your blood built." The floor cracked beneath him. Through the widening fissure, a red light rose, pulsing in time with his heartbeat. The magnolia roots broke through the boards, slick and glistening, curling around his ankles. He tried to pull free, but the harder he struggled, the tighter they held, warm and wet as though alive. Eden stepped closer, her voice a thread of thunder. "You gave the roots your name. Now they will drink it." The last thing he saw before. The light swallowed the room was her face, sorrowful, resolute, as the magnolia petals began to fall from the ceiling, slow as snow, each one black at its heart. Then silence, only the house breathing, and the faint echo of a song rising once more through the corridors, weaving through the cracks of every door. 5. Chains of velvet and smoke. He dreamed of her standing at the edge of his bed, neither servant nor spirit. When he reached to touch her, his hands met the weight of his own guilt. The nights no longer belonged to him. Sleep came in fits, in fevered gasps, and every time his eyes closed, the same dream returned, is Eden, standing in the half-light, her face calm as moonstone, her shadow reaching toward him like a tide. The air around her shimmered with the faint scent of smoke and magnolia, and when she moved, the silk of her dress whispered like dying breath. He would wake drenched in sweat, the sheets clinging to him like shrouds. But even then the air bore her trace, cool and sweet, laced with something darker beneath. He began to wonder if he was dreaming at all, or if the dreams had simply crossed over, following him into the waking world. By day he drifted through the house like a ghost. Servants avoided his gaze. The overseer refused to enter his study. Even the walls seemed to flinch when he passed, their patterns curling like burned parchment. The fever had left him hollow, yet something else had filled that emptiness, a presence, heavy and unseen. He could feel it watching him from the mirrors, listening when he spoke. Once, in the dim hush of dawn, he saw a trail of footprints leading from his door to the end of the corridor, bare, faintly wet as though pressed by invisible feet. They vanished beneath the portrait of his father, the paint on its surface now cracked in the shape of a smile. He drank more than he ate. The brandy dulled the edges of what was happening, but could not make it vanish. Every night the dreams grew closer, more solid. Sometimes he woke to find the scent of burned fabric in the air. Sometimes petals lay on the floor beside the bed, red now, not white, and always her voice. Soft, low, threaded through his thoughts. "Do you remember what you promised?" He did not, but part of him feared he did. The fifth night of the fever, he found himself walking, not knowing how or when he'd risen. The house was dark, but for the glow of embers in the hearths. The magnolia scent followed him, stronger now, almost sweet enough to make him dizzy. He wandered the halls until he reached the east wing, a part of the house sealed since his father's time. The doors groaned when he pushed them open, dust rising like ghosts disturbed from rest. There, at the end of the corridor, stood a single room lit by a faint, shifting light. He stepped inside. Velvet drapes hung heavy over the windows, their deep red turned nearly black with age. Candles burned low on the mantel, their smoke curling upward in slow, deliberate spirals. The air pulsed, alive, aware, and on the bed, surrounded by the shimmer of candlelight and shadow, stood Eden. But she was not entirely herself. Her outline flickered, blurred at the edges like mist in sunlight. Her eyes, once grey, glowed faintly gold. "You shouldn't be here," he said, though his voice trembled more than he wished. She tilted her head, her expression unreadable. "Neither should you." He stepped forward, his hands trembling. "What are you?" Her lips curved, not quite a smile, not quite sorrow. "What you made me." Before he could speak, she reached toward him. The air between them shimmered, thick with the scent of magnolia and smoke. He felt the heat before her hand even touched his chest, a pulse deep and rhythmic, like the beat of a buried heart. "Do you feel it?" She whispered. "It remembers you." He looked down and saw them, faint red lines crawling up his arms like vines beneath his skin, glowing softly in the candlelight. "What have you done?" He rasped. "I didn't bind you," she said. "You bound yourself." Her voice was almost tender, but the words hit him like cold water. He stumbled back, the heat beneath his skin rising to fire. The air thickened. Smoke began to coil from the corners of the room, dark and velvety, smelling of sweet decay. The drapes stirred, though there was no wind. "Stop this," he choked. "Please." Eden stepped closer, the glow in her eyes deepening. "The roots take what they are owed." The chains appeared then, not metal, but shadow rising from the floor in twisting strands. They coiled around his wrists, soft as silk but heavy as grief. He struggled, but the more he fought, the tighter they drew, pressing against his skin until he could feel the pulse of his blood beneath them. "Eden." His voice broke on her name. "What do you want from me?" She leaned close enough that he could feel her breath, cold, perfumed, not entirely human. "To remember," she said again, the same word she had spoken that first night. "To see." She raised a hand and the smoke parted like a curtain. He saw flashes, brief, unbearable, of what lay beneath the soil. Bones entwined with roots. Faces half consumed by bark. The ground pulsing like a living thing. The magnolia blossoms drank from that earth, blooming white above a graveyard of pain. And he saw himself among them, not as master, but as seed. His blood feeding the roots. His name carved into the trunk of the largest tree. He cried out and the vision shattered. When he looked up again, she was gone. Only the smoke remained, coiling through the air like serpents. The chains dissolved, leaving faint bruises where they had pressed into his skin. The fire in the hearth flared once, then went out, plunging the room into darkness. And in that silence, from the farthest corner of the room, a whisper rose. Not Eden's this time, but something older, deeper. The roots remember. The blood answers. The floorboards trembled. Outside, the magnolia trees began to bloom again, though the season was long dead. Their petals glowed faintly red beneath the moon, and the air filled with the sound of soft, mournful singing. Charles sank to his knees, gasping, his hands shaking in the darkness. The smell of velvet and smoke clung to him like a promise. He tried to speak her name again, but his throat would not shape the sound. Only one word came instead, a word he did not know, but which tasted like old iron and sorrow on his tongue. The house heard it, and it answered. 6. The mirror room mirrors appeared where none had been before, and each one showed him kneeling. Behind his reflection, she watched with a patience that was older than mercy. The first mirror arrived without warning. Charles found it leaning against the wall of his study, tall, gilded, veiled in dust. He had never seen it before, yet its frame seemed familiar, carved with curling magnolia branches and tiny sleeping faces beneath the leaves. He covered it that morning with a sheet and locked the door behind him. But that night, when he passed the corridor near his chambers, another mirror stood waiting there. Smaller this time, oval-shaped, its glass faintly rippling as though it remembered water. The house had begun to change again. Each day, he discovered another reflection waiting. In the halls, the stairwell, even the pantry. They multiplied quietly, without footsteps or sound. And in everyone, he saw himself not as he stood, but on his knees, always kneeling. At first he told himself it was fever returning, that the mind played cruel tricks on the guilty. But as the mirrors grew in number, the images began to move when he did not. Once he caught his reflection turning its head to look behind him before he had even shifted. Once it smiled, slow and thin, while his own mouth remained still. And always behind that kneeling figure stood her Eden. She was never fully visible, only her outline, her gaze. Her eyes grey as approaching thunder, meeting his through glass. By the 5th night, he had covered them all. He draped sheets over each one, nailed them shut with boards, even shattered a few with the heel of his boot. But when morning came, the mirrors had mended, smooth, whole, waiting. That evening he burned sage, candles, anything he could find. He whispered scripture through cracked lips, and still the house whispered back. He began to hear her humming behind the mirrors, faint as breath through a keyhole. A tune without words, ancient and soft, made of half-remembered sorrow. It followed him through the rooms, weaving through walls. Eden, he called once. His voice barely more than a prayer. A whisper came from the nearest mirror, and his own voice repeating her name slower. Eden. He froze. The reflection smiled again. That night he dreamed, or perhaps did not dream, of a long corridor made of mirrors, stretching into a horizon that had no end. He walked barefoot across the floor, his own reflection multiplied 1,000 times. The air shimmered like heat, and every step echoed as if he walked through a cathedral of glass. Then he saw her, at the far end, facing away from him. Eden, he said, and the mirrors around him whispered it back. Hundreds of voices murmuring her name until the sound became a prayer and a curse in one. She turned. Her eyes were storms now, vast and unbroken, silver-grey like clouds before a flood. "Why do you keep hiding me?" she asked, though her lips did not move. The voice came from every direction, from the mirrors, the floor, the air. He wanted to speak, to tell her he didn't understand, that she wasn't supposed to be here. But the words died in his throat. She stepped closer, her reflection moving through every mirror at once, multiplying her face into endless sorrow. "You looked at me once," she said. "And you thought I was yours." The glass trembled. The floor beneath his feet rippled like water. She raised her hand, slow, deliberate, and pressed it to one of the mirrors. He felt it cold against his chest, as though her palm rested against his heart. "Now," she whispered, "do you belong to the glass?" He woke on the floor of his study, gasping. The candles had burned out. The sheets covering the mirrors had fallen. Each one gleamed in the half-light of dawn, and in every reflection he was kneeling, his breath caught, because now, in the glass, he could see more. The walls behind his reflection were not his studies. They were made of black marble veined with red. Smoke coiled through them like ink in water, and Eden, no longer behind him but beside him, rested her hand upon his shoulder in every image. "Eden," he shouted, slamming his fist against the mirror. "Let me out!" The reflection tilted its head. Her hand tightened on its shoulder. The image smiled faintly, weighing both of them, and when he struck the mirror again, the reflection did not move. The crack appeared not on the glass, but on his palm at a thin line of blood blooming across his skin. He stumbled backward. The mirrors shuddered on their hooks as if breathing. One by one their surfaces began to darken, the silver draining into black. His reflection vanished in each, until there was only her Eden. Her face filled every pane, every wall. Her lips moved in silence. Then came the sound, a soft, distant, like wind through reeds. "You broke the promise." He fell to his knees without knowing why, hands trembling. The room spinning with cold. The mirrors pulsed, in rhythm with his heartbeat. And then he saw what she held now. Not chains, not roots, but threads of silver light. Running from her hands into him, each thread glowed with something alive. His breath, his pulse, his name. When she pulled, he felt it. His reflection tearing loose from him piece by piece, drawn into the mirrors. His scream never reached his own ears. It echoed from the glass instead, twisting until it no longer sounded human. By dawn the house was silent. The servants found every mirror covered again, neatly, carefully, as though by unseen hands. The master's study was empty, the hearth cold. Only the faint scent of magnolia smoke lingered in the air, and in one uncovered mirror, deep in the east wing, a man's face still knelt in the darkness, eyes wide, mouth open, frozen mid-prayer. Behind him, a woman stood, her eyes grey and calm. She lifted one finger to her lips and whispered through the glass, "Shh, don't wake him yet." 7. The night the whip turned. The storm broke, and with it every law he had written in his name. Lightning revealed who held the lash and who bowed beneath it. The night came crawling on its belly, heavy with thunder and the promise of confession. The air was thick enough to taste copper, rain, and something older, like the scent of turned earth after a grave has been disturbed. The wind didn't whisper. It spoke, carrying voices that did not belong to the living. Every gust brought fragments of words long buried, syllables that tasted like salt and sorrow. Charles stood at the balcony, his hands trembling on the iron rail. Below him, the magnolia grove writhed in the wind, their branches bending as though bowing to something unseen. The sky above the plantation had turned a color no storm should ever wear, a bruised violet, alive with veins of silver light that pulsed like veins beneath skin. He had seen storms before, but this one looked back. Lightning struck the far field, and for a heartbeat the world was made of glass. He saw the trees, the soil, even the air around him reflected in impossible symmetry, a mirror sky above the earth, the two trembling toward collision. And between them, shadows moving like figures caught between worlds. One of them had her shape. "Eden," he breathed, the name barely surviving the wind. The storm answered him, a crack of thunder that sounded too much like laughter. Inside, the air had turned colder than the rain outside. The servants had fled hours ago, their lanterns trailing like dying stars toward the road. The house stood hollow, filled only with its own breath. Wood groaning, windows rattling, doors sighing as if the walls were remembering how to weep. He wandered the corridors, calling her name again and again. Each time the house whispered it back. Each time it sounded more like mockery. He reached the great hall where the portraits of his ancestors hung. Their faces were calm, painted in the stillness of pride and arrogance. But tonight they glistened with moisture, condensation, he told himself, until he saw that it was not water, it was tears. One by one the painted eyes turned to look at him. "You wrote the law," they whispered, though their lips did not move. "Now the law remembers you." He stumbled backward, clutching the stair rail. The house trembled. A pulse ran through it, low and rhythmic, like a second heartbeat beneath the floorboards. It wasn't thunder. It was hooves, out in the storm. Something was coming. The rain didn't fall straight, and it circled, spiraling downward in ribbons that glowed faintly red. In the distance, where the road cut through the fields, a shape began to form. Not horse, not rider, but both. A body of smoke, a face made from broken lightning, and in its grasp the emblem of his power, not a whip, not a lash, but a brand. The symbol of ownership that had marked so many. Now it burned with blue fire, its letters shifting as though alive. Charles felt his knees weaken. The air vibrated with a deep hum, the sound of the earth remembering names it had once swallowed. The wind carried those names, hundreds, thousands, and wove them into a single voice it called his Charles Duval. He pressed his hands to his ears, but the voice came from inside him now, echoing in the cage of his chest. Your law broke the soil, it said. Now the soil breaks you. The lights flickered. One by one, every candle in the hall went out, leaving only the glow from the storm. And there, at the center of the room, she stood, Eden, not flesh, not ghost, something between. Her skin shimmered with rainlight, her dress moving like smoke. Her eyes held the reflection of the storm, endless and bright. Why did you come? He asked, though his voice was little more than breath. I never left, she said. You built this house from what you took. I am only the wind that comes to take it back. The thunder rolled closer. It wasn't outside anymore. It was inside the walls, crawling through the beams, shaking the foundations. He fell to his knees as the house began to groan. The portraits cracked, splitting down the middle. Dust rained from the ceiling. The mirrors from the east wing shattered one by one, each explosion of glass echoing like a tolling bell. And amid the chaos her voice rose, not cruel, not angry, but final. Listen, the storm answered her call, the wind turned in upon itself, forming a great spiral that swallowed the room in darkness. Charles tried to move, to crawl, to escape, but the floor had become something else, soft, rippling like wet clay. He sank an inch, then another, as though the house itself was reclaiming him. The air smelled of magnolia and ash. Through the roar of the storm, a single sound rose, the snap of something breaking, not wood, not glass, but order. When he looked up, he saw her eyes. They were not angry now. They were ancient. And then he saw the storm's light bent, shifting around her like the fabric of the world itself. Behind her stood countless figures, faces lit by lightning, eyes unblinking. They looked not at him, but through him, at something older, buried deep beneath his name. He reached toward her, desperate, pleading, trembling, Eden, but his voice was gone, stolen by the wind. When the storm finally passed, the house stood silent. No one spoke of what the servants found when they returned at dawn. The magnolia grove was gone, replaced by a ring of blackened earth that still smoked when touched. The house's upper windows were shattered, the air thick with the scent of iron and rain. And in the great hall, where once the portraits had hung, there was only one now, newly painted. Though no hand had touched a brush, it showed the master kneeling in the storm, his face turned upward, his expression unreadable. Behind him, a woman's shadow stretched to the horizon, endless, calm, and crowned with lightning. 8, the blood bargain, he begged for deliverance, offering land, wealth, even his soul. She asked only for his memory, so he would wake each morning forgetting why he trembled. The house had gone quiet after the storm, but not dead. Its silence had a pulse. Each morning the air shivered faintly, like breath over glass. The walls no longer groaned. They listened. Doors stood half open, waiting. And somewhere in the east wing, a single note hummed through the beams, and low, steady, endless, the sound of something remembering its shape. Charles Duval no longer knew how many days had passed. The clocks had stopped. His reflection had dulled. The mirrors still stood where they had been, but when he looked into them now, he saw only the faint outline of a man made of ash. He remembered the storm only as a feeling, cold rain, a voice, a light that never stopped burning. The rest had been erased. Each morning he woke with his heart pounding and his hands shaking, though he could never say why. His servants had not returned. His fields lay drowned beneath a shallow lake of silver water. And at night, he dreamed of a woman whose name he could never recall upon waking. The one constant was the hum. It grew louder with every dawn. He first saw her again on the 9th day, or perhaps the 99th. The air had turned heavy, the scent of magnolia thick enough to choke. He had been sitting at his desk trying to write anything, a letter, a will, a confession, but every word dissolved into dust before it reached the page. Then the light changed. The air bent, and there she was standing in the doorway, clothed in shadow and rainlight, her face calm, her eyes holding storms. He felt no surprise. Only the hollow ache of recognition. "You've come back," he whispered, though something in him knew she had never left. "I told you," she said softly. "The house remembers what it's owed." Her voice was neither cruel nor kind. It was a law being spoken. He rose to his feet, trembling. "I'll give you anything," he said. "The land, the house." She tilted her head, the faintest hint of pity in her eyes. "I don't want what you own." "Then take me," he said. "Take my soul if you must." At that she smiled. Not warmly, not coldly. Just enough to make the air move. "Souls," she said, "are what you never learned to value. What would I do with yours?" He dropped to his knees. "Then what do you want from me?" The candles flickered. Somewhere deep in the house the hum deepened, turning almost into a heartbeat. She stepped closer, the floor not creaking beneath her feet. "Memory," she whispered. "Only that." He stared up at her, confused. "Memory? I will take the parts that keep you awake at night. The faces you buried, the names you forgot to speak aloud, the things you did not see when you looked away. You will sleep again, Charles Duval. You will wake clean," he hesitated. "And the cost?" "The cost," she said, "is that you will never know what it means to be forgiven." He thought it mercy. That night, as the moon rose through a sky still bruised from the storm, he sat before the mirror and spoke her name, the one he could no longer recall by day. She came from the reflection, not stepping through it, but unfolding from its surface, as though she had always been there, waiting for him to speak. The candles dimmed. The room smelled of rain and iron. "Are you ready?" she asked. He nodded. "Yes." She reached forward, placing her fingers against his temples. They were cold and they burned. He gasped, clutching the sides of the chair, but she held him steady. The mirror brightened until it became liquid light, rippling with shapes and faces he could not name. "They remember," she whispered. He saw them, all those he had ordered, silenced, lost, rising through the silver like smoke. Not accusing, simply watching. The sight hollowed him. "Do you wish to forget?" she asked. Tears burned his eyes. "Yes, please." She leaned close, her breath soft against his ear. "Then remember this. Forgetting is a mercy only the damned can earn." And she pulled. It was not pain, not at first. It was weight, something heavy being drawn out, thread by thread, until the room itself tilted. His breath hitched. Images began to fall away from him. Names, faces, seasons, voices, slipping into her hands like strands of light. When she let go, he collapsed forward. The mirror stilled. The hum stopped. He opened his eyes to find her gone. The room was empty. The air smelled faintly of smoke and sweetness. He remembered nothing. The next morning the house seemed almost peaceful. The windows shone clear. The floors no longer groaned. The magnolia trees bloomed white again, their petals drifting across the veranda like the first snow of spring. He walked among them, smiling faintly, unaware of the scars on his palms or the faint red ring around his throat. He hummed a tune he could not name. Each night he slept without dreams. Each morning he woke to the same tremor in his chest, though he could never say what caused it, and in the mirror behind his reflection, her eyes still watched, calm, patient, infinite. Days turned to weeks. The hum returned. It began in the east wing again, soft as breath through wood. The servants never came back. Birds circled the house but would not land, and every dawn, as Charles looked into the glass, he noticed one small thing missing, a wrinkle from his hand, a scar, a strand of white hair. The mirrors were feeding on something more now, polishing him clean of time. He did not notice the blood on his pillow until the 12th morning. A single drop, dark and precise, centered like a seal. He wiped it away absently, unaware that the same mark now glowed faintly on the mirror's surface. When he left the room, his reflection stayed behind. By the end of the month, the house stood empty again. No one saw him leave, though sometimes when the wind turned, the magnolia trees whispered a single name, half forgotten. And in the parlor, beneath a film of dust, the mirrors still hummed, low and steady, like a song without words. If one listened closely, they said you could still hear a voice within them, calm and weary, whispering the same question over and over. What did I forget? 9. The house without a master. When dawn came, the servants found no trace of their lord, only a woman walking calmly through the magnolia trees. Where her feet passed, petals turned black, and the air hummed with release. The morning was wrong, the kind of wrong that seeps through quiet, soft, sweet, and certain. The sky hung low, not yet touched by sunlight, and the magnolia blossoms that had opened through the night now sagged, their white petals slick with something darker than dew. When the servants crept from their quarters, they felt it first in their bones, that thrum beneath the earth, the pulse of something old and satisfied. The manor stood still, as if holding its breath. Shutters clung half open, curtains swayed where there was no wind, and the great door, so often slammed in command, hung slightly ajar. "Master Duval?" One called softly. The words were devoured by silence. Inside, the air had changed. Gone was the scent of brandy and ink, of dust and sweat. In its place lingered something faintly floral, faintly burnt, like perfume left too long in the sun. The grand clock in the hall had stopped, its hands frozen at the 12th stroke. A single candle burned on the marble step below it, unlit but smoking, as if someone had just pinched it out. They searched each room in turn. The study was empty, the desk bare save for one open mirror propped upon its edge. The glass was black as oil, reflecting nothing but the faint outline of the doorway. The master's bed lay untouched, its sheets smoothed, a single magnolia bloom resting on the pillow. The servants stood in uneasy silence before it, crossing themselves though they did not know why, and then they saw her. She moved through the gardens with a calm that silenced birds. Her dress was simple, linen gone pale with moonlight, hem soaked in dew and ash. Her hair fell in heavy strands down her back, glinting faintly in the light that had not yet decided to rise. None could say from where she had come. She walked as though she had always been there, her path clear and deliberate through the magnolia grove. At each step, petals blackened, curling inward as though turning to watch her pass. The earth seemed to soften beneath her feet. The air vibrated gently, carrying a low hum almost melodic. The servants stood at a distance, rooted by fear and fascination alike. One whispered, "It's her." "The woman from the east wing," another shook his head. "No one's been there in years." But they all felt it, that strange heavy certainty that she did not belong to the house. The house belonged to her. Inside, the mirrors began to sing, not loudly but in a way that could be felt, a ringing behind the ribs, a slow tightening of the heart. Their surfaces rippled faintly, each showing something different, a door closing, a storm at sea, a hand releasing a chain, and in every reflection, somewhere at the edge, a man's face flickered, hollow-eyed, smiling faintly. Fading. She reached the veranda steps and stopped. For the first time, she looked back toward the manor. Her expression was not sorrowful nor proud. It was the stillness of a grave just filled, the peace of something that had taken too long to end. The hum deepened. Dust trembled from the rafters, and then, as the servants watched, the door that hung ajar began to close, slowly, soundlessly, until the latch clicked into place. The sound echoed across the grounds like the final breath of a dying house. They dared not speak. Not when she began to hum, a low, mournful melody that threaded through the magnolia grove and out across the fields. It was not a song of mourning. It was older, made of syllables too soft to carry meaning, but heavy with weight as she sang. The windows of the manor dimmed one by one, their glass turning to shadow. The garden pond rippled, though no wind stirred it. Beneath the surface, something shimmered. White cloth, pale hands, hair fanned like roots. One of the servants gasped. "The master!" But even as they stepped closer, the vision vanished. Only the dark water remained, calm and perfect. When the woman stopped singing, the silence that followed was immense. She looked toward the horizon, where dawn finally began to bleed across the sky. The first light touched her face, and for a moment, it seemed as though she were made not of flesh but of mist and memory, her edges softening, her eyes reflecting the pale gold of morning. Then she spoke softly, more to the earth than to those who watched. "It is done." A tremor ran through the soil. The magnolia trees shivered. She turned and began walking toward the woods beyond the field. None followed her. None dared. Where her feet passed, the ground grew darker, richer, as if feeding on what had been left behind. The petals that turned black soon crumbled into dust, leaving faint traces of crimson beneath them, like the earth remembering blood. By mid-morning, the manor stood empty again. The servants fled before noon, leaving doors open, fires cold and mirrors covered in linen sheets. The Magnolia Grove remained quiet for the rest of that season, and no birds nested there again. Travelers passing through would speak of strange lights near the windows at night, of a woman's song carried faintly on the wind. Some swore they saw a man's shadow following her, always a few paces behind, his form fading a little more each time. They called it the house without a master, and though years passed, though ivy and time tried their best to bury it, the hum never stopped. If one pressed an ear to the wall, they said, you could still hear the faintest echo, like the sigh of someone waking, or the whisper of a promise unbroken. Final image, the last magnolia bloom of the season, white as bone, drifts down through the blackened branches and lands on a patch of crimson soil. For a heartbeat it quivers, then slowly opens petal by petal, revealing inside it a single drop of blood that refuses to dry. The wind moves, the hum deepens, and far off, somewhere beneath the earth, a man begins to whisper a woman's name, one he no longer remembers but cannot forget. 10. The magnolia still burns years later. Travelers swear the house still stands, though it is not marked on any map. At night, a low voice rises from the garden, promising freedom to the broken-hearted and mercy to none. The road that once led to Duval Manor no longer exists, or perhaps it hides itself, shifting with the fog, waiting for those who have lost their way in more than one sense. The locals will tell you it lies beyond the swamp, where the magnolia trees lean too close to the ground, and the air tastes faintly of iron. They will warn you not to follow the scent of flowers after dusk, because flowers do not bloom there anymore, and yet, on certain nights when the moon hangs low and swollen, travelers claim they see light in the distance, a glow too steady to be fire, too mournful to be the stars. They call it the burning magnolia. No one agrees on what it looks like. Some say it's a tree set eternally aflame, petals of smoke curling into the dark. Others whisper of a house standing alone in the mist, its windows lit from within, as if someone still waits at the table, still watching the road. But all agree on one thing: once you see the light, you will hear the voice. It begins softly, like the murmur of water beneath the soil. Then it grows, shaping itself into words that are neither command nor prayer. It is a woman's voice, low, patient, endless. Come closer, it says. All debts are paid here, all wrongs remembered. Those who hear it say their hearts beat out of rhythm, as though trying to flee their own chests. The air thickens. The scent of magnolia fills their lungs, sweet, choking, heavy as sleep. Some run, some kneel, none ever forget. There was a man once, a preacher, who passed through the countryside carrying his faith like a shield. He came to the edge of the old Duval land with a torch in one hand and a cross in the other, saying he would banish the ghost that plagued the swamp. They found his horse days later, reins twisted around its own neck. Of the preacher, there was no sign, save for his voice, still echoing faintly through the reeds, whispering prayers that ended halfway through the Amen. The house itself, they say, is changed. It no longer stands proud and white upon the hill. Its frame sags, its porch swallowed by vines. The windows are hollow eyes, the doors open wounds, and yet inside there are rooms untouched by time, a table still set for supper, a candle still burning in the hall, footsteps that cross the floor above when the wind grows still. Sometimes, if one listens closely, one can hear the faint crackle of fire in the parlor, though no flame has lived there for decades, and in that soft, steady glow, a magnolia branch burns, forever caught between blossom and ash. They say she tends it, the woman with eyes like storms, the one who walked away when the world forgot her name. She comes at midnight, barefoot, her dress trailing petals that bloom and die in her wake. Her shadow moves before her, bending the light as if it too remembers what it once served. No one knows what she guards, only that she waits. Some believe she guards the house from intruders. Others say she guards the man, his soul trapped beneath the foundation, whispering through the roots of the magnolia tree. But there are those, quiet and few, who think she guards nothing at all. That she stays because the land itself remembers her too deeply to let her go. One autumn, a child disappeared near the swamp. When they found her 3 days later, she was standing at the edge of the dried well behind the ruins. She held a single magnolia bloom in her hands, its petals black at the edges. When they asked her what happened, she said a lady sang to her. She said I looked lonely, the girl whispered. She said she could give me freedom. Her mother took the flower from her hand. It turned to ash before it hit the ground. Years bled into decades. The land changed names, changed hands. But the stories never faded. Some said the magnolia still bloomed out of season. Others swore the air around the grove was always warm, even in winter. A traveller once claimed he saw a light burning from the parlour window. When he approached, he found the door unlocked, the hinges sighing as if exhaling centuries of dust. Inside, the house was silent. He saw the portraits first, lined along the hall, eyes dulled by grime. Only one face was clear, a woman, dark hair unbound, gaze fixed forward. In her eyes, he swore. Something moved. He turned to flee, but the floorboards moaned, and a whisper rose from beneath them. Stay, it breathed. The house remembers kindness. He ran anyway. When he reached the tree line, he turned back for one last glance. The windows of the house had filled with light. Dozens of flickering shapes, each shaped like a candle's flame, each bending toward the magnolia grove, and above it all, a figure in white stood framed in the doorway. Her eyes were storms, her lips curved in something not quite a smile, and behind her, through the smoke and glow, another shape took form, a man's outline, tall and hollow, reaching toward her before fading once more into the firelight. No one goes there now, not the hunters, not the priests, not the brave who swear they do not fear ghosts, for the magnolia still burns. Its roots drink from the graves of those who thought they owned it. Its blossoms bloom in defiance of death, and when the night grows deep and the wind grows still, that same voice rises again, soft, sweet. Endless freedom to the broken-hearted, it whispers. Then, after a pause, darker still, and mercy to none. Final image. The house stands quiet beneath the black magnolia tree. A single petal drifts down and lands on the parlour's cold floor. As it touches the ground, it catches fire, white, silent, eternal. In the reflection of the nearest window, two shadows hold hands, though no bodies cast them. The flame flickers once. Then the house breathes in and the magnolia burns anew.